You ever stop and think about this? How did humanity learn to see better before we even understood how seeing worked? I mean, before there were any equations, before lenses were drawn up on blackboards, and way before anyone could explain the physics of light. And yet somehow, someone figured out how to literally bend vision itself. And that, right there, is the big mystery we're going to unpack. How on earth did people invent eyeglasses centuries before they understood the science of optics, before they even knew why a lens worked at all? Well, the answer is a lot stranger and way more human than you might think. To really get it, you gotta transport yourself to a completely different world. So picture this. You're a scholar in medieval Europe. Your entire life, your power, your job, your status, it all comes down to reading tiny, handwritten letters for hours and hours on end. And then one day, it starts. The letters begin to blur. It's not sudden, just enough that you find yourself squinting, enough that the headaches start to kick in. And remember, there's no word for this, no concept of presbyopia, or that your eyes just get older. You just think you're failing. And this is the critical part. For most of human history, losing your close vision wasn't just an inconvenience. It meant losing your authority, your productivity, and a lot of the time, it was about your very survival. If you couldn't read, you were done.
So what's really interesting is the timing of all this. Eyeglasses don't pop up in ancient Greece or Rome. They just appear, almost out of nowhere, in late 13th century Italy. So why there and why then? Well, because something totally radical was happening.
There was an explosion of knowledge. Books were multiplying like crazy. Universities were popping up all over Europe. Monks and scholars weren't just copying scripture anymore, they were copying everything. Law, medicine, philosophy, accounting. Reading was no longer a rare skill. It was a relentless part of the job. And the most important thing to realize is this. The invention of eyeglasses was not driven by some lofty scientific curiosity. It was driven by pain, by eyes straining, by scholars getting older, by monks going blind trying to read by candlelight. People were desperate. So what they do? They improvised. And that improvisation started with a total accident. A clue they found in an object people already had, but used for something completely different. See, long before eyeglasses, people had burning glasses. These were basically just convex lenses that you'd use to focus sunlight and start a fire. But at some point, somewhere, someone noticed something strange. When you looked through one at a page, the letters got bigger. There was no explanation, no math, just this crude, undeniable fact. And this is so crucial. Eyeglasses were not invented by thinkers, not by scientists or philosophers. They were invented by makers, by craftsmen who shaped glass all day long and trusted their hands way more than they trusted theory. Their whole process was just pure trial and error. Imagine it. They'd grind a lens, hold it over some text, see what happened, and then just repeat over and over and over. Make it too thick, and it distorted everything. Make it too thin, and it was useless. There was no formula, just this grueling hands-on process. And yet, they made progress. And around the year 1285, something totally new appears in northern Italy, the world's first wearable vision aid. It was pretty simple. 2 convex lenses, mounted in frames made of wood or horn and connected by a single rivet. You had to pinch them on your nose. I'm sure they slipped constantly, they were awkward and unstable, but they worked. And eyeglasses didn't just restore vision, they extended people's productive lives. A scholar who would have been basically useless at 45 could now work well into their 60s. This effectively doubled their intellectual lifespan. That meant more books were written, more laws were codified, more knowledge was built up. It was a game changer. And the wild part is, all of this happened without anyone understanding why a curved piece of glass did this. The early explanations are actually pretty funny. Some people thought the lenses literally strengthened the eye. Others said they corrected corrupted humors. No one was talking about refraction. It was a practical solution that just worked, with zero theoretical understanding. But, not everyone trusted them at first. The initial reaction was this mix of wonder and a lot of suspicion. But it didn't matter. It quietly sparked an invisible revolution that would totally change the course of civilization. The path to acceptance was slow. Back in the 13th century, there was all this suspicion. Some clergy even called them unnatural. By the 14th century, eyeglass makers had regulated guilds, and by the 15th century, you start to see glasses showing up in paintings as a symbol of wisdom and authority. People were wearing them proudly long, long before they could ever explain them.
And I mean a long time before. It wasn't until Johannes Kepler, in the early 1600s, that someone finally figured out how lenses actually worked. Eyeglasses had already been around for over 300 years by then. 3 centuries of use, of dependence, of success, all without understanding the why. This whole story really reveals something kinda uncomfortable about progress. We like to believe that science comes first, right? That theory always comes before invention. But eyeglasses prove the exact opposite. Sometimes we humans just do something long before we know why it works.
This invention wasn't born from a flash of genius insight. It was born from a simple, powerful refusal to accept decline. It came from aging scholars looking down at their blurring texts and just thinking to themselves, I am not finished yet. So the next time you put on your glasses, remember this. You're not just wearing a product of theory. You're wearing a medieval rebellion against blindness. And the incredible thing is, it worked long before anyone could ever explain why.